The sky was overcast, a sign of the storm coming, and a brisk winter wind whipped through the parking lot of a downtown supermarket. Lieutenant Colonel Jasmine Walker stepped out of her car, her military uniform neat and sharp, the insignia of her rank gleaming under the streetlights. She walked toward the entrance with a calm, purposeful stride, unaware of the glances she was receiving from some of the shoppers. Jasmine had served in the Army for over 15 years, earning her rank through dedication and hard work. But no matter how many battles she'd fought, how much she'd sacrificed, she could never get used to the stares that followed her, especially when she was out of uniform. For many, a black woman in a lieutenant colonel's uniform was an impossible image. They couldn't reconcile her strength with their stereotypes. Inside the store, Jasmine grabbed a cart and started picking up a few things. Just the essentials. A bottle of water, some snacks, and a couple of personal items. Though her rank demanded respect, she preferred to do her own shopping, without relying on colleagues or subordinates. As she headed toward the checkout, Officer Greg Matthews, a middle-aged cop with a hardened face, spotted her from across the store. He'd been a cop for over 20 years and had never hidden his conservative, prejudiced views. In his world, people like Jasmine didn't belong in positions of power. Women, especially black women, were not supposed to wear uniforms like hers. Matthews was immediately suspicious. A black woman in a military uniform? Something didn't add up. He eyed her as he walked closer, his steps measured. By the time he stood in front of her, she was already at the counter, placing her items on the conveyor belt. "Hey," Matthews said, his voice gruff. "You there in the uniform?" Jasmine looked up, her brow furrowing at his tone. "Are you speaking to me, officer?" "Yeah," Matthews said, his eyes narrowing as he scanned her from head to toe. "What's your deal with this uniform? You know impersonating an officer is a crime?" Jasmine blinked, taken aback by the accusation. "This is my uniform," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Jasmine Walker, U.S. Army." Matthews smirked, his expression filled with disbelief. "Lieutenant Colonel? A black woman? I don't think so. You're just wearing that to stir up trouble, aren't you? Where'd you get it? EBAY? Jasmine's jaw tightened. She'd dealt with racism her whole life. But this was different. She had never been accused of impersonating someone in public, especially not by a police officer. She drew a breath, keeping her composure. "I don't have to prove anything to you," she said. "Call my unit if you want to verify my identity, but I won't stand here and be harassed." Matthews crossed his arms, looking at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "You really think I'm going to take your word for it? A black woman with that rank? You must think I'm stupid." Jasmine stood tall, refusing to back down. "I'm not obligated to prove anything to you. If you're so sure I'm lying, call the military. But if you continue this, I'll report you for harassment. I've done nothing wrong." Matthews sneered, clearly irritated. "You think you can talk to me like that? I'm a cop. I've got the right to question you." Jasmine met his gaze, unfazed. "You're questioning me based on my skin color and my uniform. That's not a valid reason. You've got no cause to harass me, and I'm done entertaining this nonsense." The tension in the air was thick. Matthews was fuming, but Jasmine stood her ground. Around them, a few people were starting to notice, and whispers began to spread through the store. "I'm warning you," Jasmine said, her voice steady. "If you keep this up, it's going to be a problem. I'm not the one you want to mess with." Matthews hesitated, his hand instinctively reaching for his belt, but Jasmine's unwavering confidence made him pause. The scene was escalating quickly, but Jasmine wasn't about to back down. The atmosphere in the supermarket had shifted. People were watching now, some sneaking glances, others openly filming the confrontation. The whispers grew louder, but Jasmine remained composed, her eyes locked on Officer Matthews. Matthews, on the other hand, was growing more agitated by the second. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially by someone who refused to cower. His hand hovered near his holstered gun, but he kept his grip tight enough to make his intentions clear. "You think you can talk to me like this?" Matthews snarled, stepping closer. "I'm a police officer, and you're impersonating an officer. I don't care what your rank is. If you don't show me identification right now, I'll have you arrested for impersonating a military officer. You can't just wear that uniform without proof." Jasmine's eyes flashed with controlled anger. "I've already told you who I am. I don't need to prove myself to you. "You're the one in the wrong here, Officer Matthews." He ignored her, his voice rising. "You're not fooling anyone. You're out here trying to make a scene, and it's not going to work. You'll regret messing with me." The crowd around them was growing. People started pulling out their phones, clearly aware that something wasn't right. Jasmine could feel the weight of their eyes on her, but she refused to let that pressure affect her. She was in control here, and she knew it. "I'm not here to make a scene," Jasmine said calmly, "but I won't stand by and let you continue to harass me. You're abusing your position right now." Matthews clenched his fists, his face turning red with frustration. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I've been in law enforcement for 20 years. I know a fake when I see it. You're not getting away with this." Jasmine's voice remained level, but her tone carried the weight of years of experience. "I'm telling you again, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Jasmine Walker. If you don't believe me, that's your problem, not mine. You're the one in the wrong here, and I'll make sure this is reported. This is harassment, plain and simple." The officer took a step closer, his posture aggressive. The people around them were holding their breath, unsure of how this would play out. Matthews was no longer hiding his disdain for Jasmine, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think I'm going to let a black woman like you stand here and insult me? You're an imposter, and I'll make sure you pay for this." Jasmine took a deep breath, keeping her hands by her sides, aware of the tension growing with every word. "This isn't about race," she said, her voice still steady. "It's about you abusing your power. If you continue, I'll take action." Matthews looked around at the crowd, feeling the eyes on him. The whispers were growing louder, and Jasmine noticed a few people were starting to move closer. She could tell that some were on her side, and that gave her strength. "Who do you think you are?" Matthews spat. "You're threatening me? You really think I won't take you down?" Jasmine's gaze never wavered. "I'm not threatening you. I'm simply telling you the truth. If you continue with this, you'll be the one who has to deal with the consequences, not me." The tension was unbearable. The officer's eyes flickered toward his gun, and Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She was well aware of how quickly a situation like this could escalate, but she wasn't going to show fear, not now. Then suddenly Matthews did something that shocked everyone in the store. He reached for his gun. His hand was shaking slightly as he pulled it from the holster and pointed it directly at her. The crowd gasped in collective horror. Jasmine's eyes widened, but her body remained still. She had been in dangerous situations before, but this was something else entirely. She could feel the cold metal of the gun in the air between them, but she didn't flinch. She couldn't. "Don't do this," Jasmine said, her voice calm, but a fierce edge running through it. "You don't want to make this mistake. If you pull that trigger, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Matthews sneered, his finger twitching near the trigger. "You think I care about you or your threats? You've crossed the line, lady." Jasmine's mind raced. This wasn't a game. One wrong move and she could be in real danger. But she also knew she couldn't back down now. Not for herself, not for anyone watching. "I'll give you one last chance, Matthews," she said, locking eyes with him. "Put the gun down. This doesn't have to end like this." There was a long pause. Matthews' hand trembled, but he didn't lower the gun. He was too proud, too consumed by his own rage. Jasmine could see the conflict in his eyes, but still, he held firm. Jasmine's heart was pounding. She knew it was only a matter of time before someone intervened, either the crowd or the authorities. She just needed to hold on long enough. The air in the supermarket was thick with tension. Jasmine stood her ground, her eyes fixed on Officer Matthews, whose gun was still pointed directly at her. Her heart raced, but her military training helped her keep calm. Surrounded by onlookers, all filming, she knew the situation could escalate at any moment. "Matthews, put the gun down," Jasmine said, her voice steady. "This isn't going to end the way you think." Matthews' face twisted with rage, his grip tightening on the weapon. "You think I'm afraid of you? You're a fraud. I'm not letting you get away with this." Jasmine's mind raced as she considered her next move. One wrong move could turn this into something far worse. Her hand inched toward her phone, but she had to be careful. Matthews was already acting erratic, and any sudden motion could provoke him. As the standoff continued, the sound of sirens began to echo outside. Jasmine felt a flicker of hope. Help was on the way. The sirens grew louder, closer. Matthews, momentarily distracted, glanced toward the door, but his grip on the gun didn't loosen. "This is between you and me, not them," Matthews growled. Jasmine took a deep breath. She wasn't backing down. "I'm not the one in danger here." Then, like a beacon of authority, Sheriff Michael Harris walked through the door. A seasoned lawman, Harris's presence was commanding. His sharp eyes immediately locked onto Matthews and the gun pointed at Jasmine. Harris was no stranger to conflict, but he wasn't going to let this one go unchecked. "Matthews, put the gun down," Harris said, his voice calm yet firm. The whole store seemed to hold its breath. Matthews didn't respond, but the tension in his posture was palpable. "You're out of line," Harris continued, stepping forward. "Put the gun down, now." Matthews hesitated, his eyes flickering between Jasmine and Harris. "She's faking it. She doesn't belong here." Jasmine felt a wave of anger, but she held it in check. Matthews' desperation was clear. He needed to justify his actions. But Jasmine wasn't about to let him manipulate the situation any longer. "You're the one who's wrong," Jasmine said, her voice unwavering. "Put the gun down, Matthews. This isn't your call." The store was dead silent now. Matthews' grip on the gun faltered as he looked around, his anger warring with his fear. Slowly, he lowered the weapon, his face flushed with humiliation. Harris stepped forward, his eyes hard. "You're done, Matthews," Harris said firmly. I'll take it from here." Two officers moved in to secure Matthews, handcuffing him and leading him toward the exit. The crowd watched in stunned silence, unsure of what had just happened, but knowing that it was over. Jasmine let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Jasmine, are you all right?" Harris asked, his voice softening as he turned to her. Jasmine nodded, though her mind was already racing. "I'm fine, Mike. But this isn't just about me. This is about the way he treated me, and how many others like me he's treated the same way." Sheriff Harris gave her a solemn nod. "I know. We'll make sure this doesn't get swept under the rug." As Matthews was taken away in cuffs, Jasmine couldn't help but feel a sense of relief, but it was fleeting. She knew that the battle was far from over. What happened today wasn't just a personal confrontation. It was part of a much bigger fight, and Jasmine was ready for it. Jasmine stood quietly at the counter, her thoughts racing as she watched Matthews being led out of the store. The air in the supermarket felt different now, heavy with the weight of what had just happened. But in that same breath, there was a strange sense of relief. Matthews had been taken down, and the immediate danger had passed. Yet Jasmine knew that the repercussions of this moment would extend far beyond the walls of this building. She glanced around the store at the onlookers. Some were still filming, while others whispered to each other, shaking their heads. Jasmine felt their eyes on her, but she didn't let it faze her. She had done what she needed to do, stood her ground in the face of a threat, even when it meant risking everything. The door to the store swung open, and Sheriff Michael Harris stepped back in. He was on the phone, speaking in quiet tones, but his expression told Jasmine everything she needed to know. He wasn't done yet. Neither of them were. "Jasmine," he said, ending the call and walking over to her. "I've already contacted the department. Matthews is being transferred to the station, and they'll start an internal investigation right away. This isn't going to be swept under the rug." Jasmine nodded. "I know, Mike, but this is bigger than just him. This is about everything he represents. The prejudice, the assumption that someone like me doesn't belong in a position of power." Harris paused, his eyes meeting hers with understanding. He had worked with Jasmine for years and knew exactly what she was saying. But this, what had just happened, was different. It was about confronting not just one officer, but an entire system of bias and discrimination. "I understand," Harris said softly, "and it's not just about Matthews. It's about what he's been doing behind the scenes for years. We'll handle it, I promise you." Jasmine felt a small wave of gratitude toward him. She had known from the beginning that this wasn't just about her. She wasn't the only one who'd experienced this kind of treatment. There were others out there, other women of color, other soldiers, other officers, who had been humiliated, doubted, or belittled simply because of who they were. And it was time for it to stop. But that wasn't the only thing on her mind. She knew the fallout from this would spread quickly, especially given the footage that had already circulated online. It wasn't just a local issue anymore. The whole country would soon know about what had happened in this supermarket. As if on cue, Jasmine's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a message from her superior, General Robert Cole. He had heard about the incident and wanted to know what was happening. She quickly typed a brief response, explaining what had occurred and that she was fine. But deep down, she knew the conversation with him wouldn't end there. There would be more questions, more discussions about the public perception of this event. "Do you think this will blow over?" Jasmine asked, her voice tinged with doubt. Harris shook his head. "Not in a million years. This is going to be bigger than anyone expects. Matthews is just one piece of the puzzle. The real question is how the department is going to respond." Just then, one of the officers from the station, a young woman named Emily, approached. She looked nervous, unsure of how to address Jasmine, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. "Lieutenant Carter, I just wanted to say thank you. I know what you did took a lot of courage." Jasmine was taken aback by the sincerity in Emily's words. It wasn't often that someone took the time to acknowledge the struggle, especially in a situation like this. She gave the officer a small nod. "Thank you, officer, but I didn't do it alone. It takes more than one person to make a difference. This isn't over yet." As the day went on, more officers arrived to take statements from the witnesses, and the news of Matthews' arrest began to make its rounds. Jasmine stayed at the supermarket for a while longer, but she could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. There was no going back from this. No matter what happened next, things would change. A few hours later, she received a call from Sheriff Harris. "Jasmine, I just wanted to give you an update. Matthews is being formally charged with abuse of power, racial discrimination, and misconduct. We're pushing for a full investigation. It's not going to be easy, but we're on it." Jasmine felt a sense of relief, but there was a heaviness in her chest. This wasn't just about Matthews. This was about the culture that allowed people like him to operate unchecked for so long. "I appreciate it, Mike," she said, "but it's going to take more than just one investigation. We need change across the board." "I know, and we'll make sure it happens, one step at a time." As Jasmine ended the call, she looked around the supermarket one last time. It was just another day, but for her, nothing would ever be the same. The fight for justice wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The next few days passed in a blur. News outlets picked up the story, and soon the incident at the supermarket became a nationwide topic. Jasmine found herself in the spotlight, but it wasn't the fame that concerned her. It was the message. The backlash against Officer Matthews was swift, but the support she received from her community, her colleagues, and even complete strangers was overwhelming. Jasmine's phone buzzed constantly, with messages of support pouring in from friends, family, and fellow service members. But amidst the praise, there were still those who couldn't understand why she hadn't simply backed down or cooperated. The same old arguments, why escalate things, floated around. But Jasmine was used to that. She'd heard those words too many times in her career. She had faced challenges as a Black woman in the military her whole life. From the moment she enlisted, she had been told that she didn't belong, that she would never rise to the rank she'd earned, that her skin color would always stand in the way. And yet, here she was, Lieutenant Colonel Jasmine Carter. But the truth was, it hadn't been easy. Every day was a struggle against both the enemy and her own doubts. The internal investigation into Matthews moved quickly. His history of racist comments and discriminatory behavior was uncovered, and soon it was clear that he had no place in the police force. A public trial was scheduled, and while Jasmine knew the process would take time, she felt a sense of justice slowly but surely taking root. One evening, as she sat at her kitchen table, reviewing some case files, her phone rang. It was General Robert Cole. "Lieutenant Carter," he said, his voice a mix of admiration and concern. "We've been following what happened. I wanted to personally thank you for handling that situation with such strength and composure. What you did wasn't just about you. It was about all of us, about standing up for what's right. And I want you to know you've got our full support." Jasmine felt a lump in her throat. It wasn't every day that a general took the time to acknowledge her like that. "Thank you, General, but this is far from over. This isn't just about me. This is about the change we all need to see." "You're right," Cole agreed, "and we'll make sure the changes you're pushing for happen." I've already spoken to the higher-ups about a full review of our training and recruitment processes. We're going to root out this kind of behavior. We're in this together." The words were comforting, but Jasmine knew that real change wasn't going to happen overnight. She had seen firsthand how deeply entrenched bias and prejudice were, even within the systems meant to protect and serve. But hearing that the higher-ups were taking her concerns seriously was a step in the right direction. The trial against Matthews took place a few weeks later. The courtroom was packed with people, reporters, and legal teams. Jasmine was not in attendance, but she had been kept informed by Sheriff Harris, who had been instrumental in ensuring the investigation stayed on track. When the verdict came in, Matthews was found guilty of racial discrimination, abuse of power, and misconduct. He was sentenced to prison time, and the department made it clear that he would never serve as an officer again. As the news broke, Jasmine allowed herself a small smile. This was a victory, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been marginalized, doubted, or mistreated because of the color of their skin. But there was still more work to be done. Matthews was just one officer in a much larger system. The victory, however, wasn't just in the conviction. It was in the conversations that followed. The conversations Jasmine had started by standing up to him in that supermarket. People were talking. The community was discussing racism, discrimination, and what needed to change. And for Jasmine, that was the most important part. Days later, she stood before a crowd at a press conference, her uniform impeccable, her posture strong. This victory isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. Everyone who has been made to feel small because of the color of their skin, she said. We still have a long way to go, but this is a start. This is how we make change. By speaking out, by standing up, and by never letting our voices be silenced. The room erupted in applause, and for the first time in a long while, Jasmine felt that familiar sense of pride. It wasn't the pride that came from rank or recognition. It was the pride that came from knowing she had done the right thing. As she left the conference, her phone rang again. It was Sheriff Harris. "Jasmine," he said, his voice full of pride, "you've done it. The whole department's behind you. Things are changing." Jasmine smiled. "We've only just begun." As she walked outside into the cool evening air, she couldn't help but feel a sense of determination settle deep within her. She knew there would be more battles ahead, but with the support of those around her, she was ready for whatever came next. Change was coming, slowly but surely, and Jasmine Carter was going to make sure she was part of it.